Christmas in the American wilderness was a varied and deeply personal affair. For the pioneer families huddled in their log cabins on the frontier, it was a time of community, of faith, of creating light in the darkness. But for a different kind of wilderness dweller, the mountain man, Christmas was something else entirely. These were men who lived a life of profound isolation, of brutal hardship, of a solitude so complete that it is almost impossible for us in our hyper-connected world to truly comprehend. Who were these men? They were not born to the mountains. They were farm boys from Vermont, clerks from Boston, blacksmiths from Pennsylvania. They were men who had felt the suffocating grip of a life they had not chosen and who had broken free, trading safety for sovereignty. They were men who had turned their backs on civilization, who had rejected the comforts and the constraints of settled life, who had chosen instead a life of freedom and of danger in the vast, untamed wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. They were trappers, hunters, scouts, men who lived by their wits and their rifles, who knew the language of the wind and the tracks of every animal, who could survive for months on end with nothing but what they could carry on their backs. And for them, Christmas was not a day of celebration in the way that we understand it. It was not a day of carols and presents, of family gatherings and festive meals. It was a day of survival, a day of reflection, a day that was, in many ways, just like any other day in the wilderness. But it was also a day that held a special meaning, a day that forced these solitary men to confront the choices they had made, the lives they had left behind, and the profound loneliness that was the price of their freedom. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Section 1. The Solitary Feast. For the mountain man, Christmas was not a time for carols, for decorations, for the gathering of family and friends. It was a time for a feast, but a feast of a very different kind. It was a feast of solitude, a meal that was not about celebration, but about survival, about the simple, profound pleasure of a full belly in the heart of a harsh and unforgiving winter. The centerpiece of this feast was meat, and lots of it. Imagine the feeling of that first bite, the explosion of flavor, the rich, life-giving fat coating the tongue. After weeks of lean jerky and monotonous pemmican, this was more than food. It was a resurrection. The mountain man was a carnivore, a predator, a man who lived off the land in the most literal sense. His diet was almost exclusively meat, fresh when he could get it, dried and jerked when he couldn't. Vegetables were a rarity, a luxury that he might encounter at a trading post or in a Native American village. But on Christmas, if he had been successful in his hunting, he would indulge in the fruits of his labor. He would roast a haunch of venison over the fire, the fat sizzling and popping, the skin crackling and turning a deep mahogany brown. You can almost feel the intense, dry heat on your face, smell the intoxicating aroma of pine smoke, and roasting meat filling the small, smoky cabin. The smell was intoxicating, a rich, meaty aroma that made his mouth water and his stomach growl. He would turn the meat slowly, watching the skin crisp and darken, the juices running down into the fire, hissing and steaming. He would feast on beaver tail, a delicacy that was considered the height of mountain man cuisine. The tail was pure fat, a dense, rich source of calories that was essential for survival in the brutal cold of a Rocky Mountain winter. He would roast it over the coals until the skin was charred and blistered, then peel it away to reveal the pale, fatty meat beneath. It was greasy. It was rich. It was utterly delicious. He would eat buffalo tongue, a tender and flavorful cut that was reserved for special occasions. The tongue was prized not just for its taste, but for its texture, soft and yielding, almost buttery, a welcome change from the tough, stringy meat that was his usual fare. He would boil it slowly in a pot over the fire, then slice it thin and eat it with his fingers, savoring every bite. and he would wash it all down with a cup of strong black coffee, a rare and precious luxury that was worth its weight in gold. Coffee was one of the few things that a mountain man would go out of his way to acquire, trading valuable furs for a few precious pounds of beans. He would brew it strong and bitter, the caffeine a welcome jolt to his system, the warmth spreading through his body like liquid fire. But the feast was not just about the meat. If the mountain man was lucky, if he had been able to trade at a post or had saved some precious supplies, he might have a few other luxuries. He might have a small amount of flour, which he would mix with water and a pinch of salt to make a simple flatbread, cooked on a hot stone by the fire. He might have a bit of sugar, which he would stir into his coffee, the sweetness a rare and precious treat. He might even have a small amount of dried fruit, apples perhaps, or raisins, which he would eat slowly, savoring each bite, making it last as long as possible. This was not a meal that was shared with others. It was a meal that was eaten alone in the quiet solitude of the wilderness. There was no conversation, no laughter, no clinking of glasses. There was only the sound of the fire, the wind outside, and the mountain man's own breathing. It was a meal that was a testament to the mountain man's skill as a hunter, to his ability to provide for himself, to his fierce and unyielding independence. It was a meal that was a celebration not of Christmas, but of the mountain man himself, of his strength, his resilience, his ability to survive and to thrive in a world that was constantly trying to kill him. And when the meal was done, when he had eaten his fill and sat back, his belly full, his body warm, he would feel a deep sense of satisfaction, a pride in what he had accomplished. He had survived another day, another week, another month in the wilderness. He had provided for himself. He was alive, and that in itself was something worth celebrating. Section 2. The Winter Rendezvous. But the profound silence of that solitary feast had a powerful counterpoint. After months of hearing nothing but the wind and the cry of the hawk, the human soul craves a different kind of noise. And so, for some, the crushing loneliness of the wilderness gave way to the explosive chaos of the Winter Rendezvous. The rendezvous was a large annual gathering of mountain men, fur traders, and Native Americans, a time for trading, for celebrating, for a brief and glorious respite from the isolation of the wilderness. And while the main rendezvous took place in the summer, there were smaller informal gatherings that took place in the winter, often around Christmas. These winter rendezvous were a time for the mountain men to come together, to share stories, to drink, to gamble, to fight, to be. For a brief time, a part of a community. They would gather in a sheltered valley, their cabins and teepees clustered together for warmth and for protection. The valley would be alive with activity, with the sound of voices, of laughter, of arguments, of the crackle of fires and the neighing of horses. It was a stark contrast to the silent, frozen wilderness that surrounded them. They would trade their furs for supplies, for coffee, for sugar, for tobacco, for ammunition, for the small luxuries that made life in the wilderness bearable. The trading was fierce and competitive, each man trying to get the best price for his furs, each trader trying to maximize his profit. But there was also a sense of camaraderie, a mutual respect between men who understood the hardships and the dangers of life in the mountains. And they would celebrate. They would feast on roasted buffalo, on elk, on deer, the meat cooked over open fires, the smell of roasting flesh filling the valley. They would drink whiskey, a fiery liquid that warmed them from the inside out, loosening their tongues and their inhibitions. The whiskey was often homemade, distilled from whatever grain or fruit was available, and it was rough and potent, a drink that could strip the paint off a fence. They would gamble, their hard-earned furs and pelts changing hands in a single night. Card games, dice games, betting on wrestling matches, or shooting contests. The mountain men would gamble on anything. Some men would win big, walking away with a fortune in furs. Others would lose everything, their entire winter's work gone in a single unlucky hand. But win or lose, they would keep playing because the gambling was not really about the money. It was about the thrill, the excitement, the brief and glorious feeling of being alive. They would fight, their pent-up aggression and loneliness exploding in a flurry of fists and of curses. These were not gentlemanly duels. These were brutal, bare-knuckle brawls that would leave men bloodied and bruised. But they were also a form of bonding, a way for men to prove their toughness, to earn respect, to work out their frustrations in a physical and immediate way. And they would dance, their heavy boots stomping on the frozen ground, their voices raised in song. The dances were wild and chaotic, a mix of traditional folk dances and improvised movements, fueled by whiskey and by the sheer joy of being among other people after months of solitude. This was a wild, raucous, and often violent celebration, a far cry from the quiet, peaceful Christmas of the pioneer families. Fights would break out over perceived slights, over gambling debts, over women. Men would drink themselves into a stupor, then wake up the next morning with pounding headaches and empty pockets. But it was a celebration nonetheless. It was a celebration of life, of survival, of the fierce and untamed spirit of the mountain man. It was a brief and glorious explosion of noise and of chaos in the heart of the silent wilderness, a reminder that even the most solitary of men need the warmth and the comfort of community, even if that community was rough, crude, and often dangerous. Section 3. A Christmas with the Crow. But not all gatherings were as chaotic as the rendezvous. For many mountain men, community was found not in a drunken brawl, but in the quiet dignity of a Native American village. These men formed deep, lasting relationships with tribes like the Crow, the Shoshone, and the Flathead, living with them, trading with them, and even marrying into their families. For these men, Christmas was not a solitary affair, but a time of community, of family, of a rich and complex cultural exchange. A mountain man who had married a Native American woman, a practice that was common among the trappers, would spend his Christmas not in a lonely cabin, but in a bustling village surrounded by the warmth and the chaos of a large extended family. He would be a part of their winter celebrations, their feasts, their ceremonies, their stories. He would learn their traditions, their beliefs, their way of life, and he would, in turn, share his own traditions, his own beliefs, his own stories. The Crow, the Shoshone, the Flathead. These tribes were often allies of the mountain men, and the relationships between them were complex and multifaceted. A mountain man who had married into a tribe was not just a guest. He was a member of the family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. He would hunt with the men. He would share in the work of the camp. He would protect the village from enemies, and in return, he would be protected. He would be fed. He would be loved. He might, for example, tell the story of the Nativity, his words translated by his wife, the story of a child born in a humble stable, resonating with a people who lived so close to the earth, who understood the harshness of winter and the miracle of new life. But more often, the cultural exchange flowed in the other direction. The mountain man would be invited to participate in the tribe's own winter solstice ceremonies, rituals that were far older than Christmas itself. The children would listen with wide eyes, the elders would nod thoughtfully, and his wife would smile, proud of her husband's ability to bridge two worlds. He might share a Christmas carol, his rough voice blending with the sound of the drums and the rattles, creating a strange and beautiful hybrid of two musical traditions. He might even try to recreate a Christmas feast, roasting a wild turkey instead of a goose, making a pudding out of pounded corn and dried berries, a frontier approximation of the plum pudding of his childhood. But more often than not, he would simply participate in the tribe's own winter celebrations, their own rituals of gratitude and of renewal. He would sit in the smoky warmth of the lodge, listening to the stories of the elders, stories of great hunts and of brave warriors, stories of the spirits that inhabited the mountains and the rivers. He would learn about the tribe's cosmology, their understanding of the world, their place in the great web of life. He would participate in the sweat lodge ceremony, a ritual of purification and of prayer, the intense heat and the darkness stripping away the layers of his own culture, leaving him feeling raw and new and connected to something ancient and powerful. He would dance with the men, his body moving to the rhythm of the drums, his voice joining in the chants. He would feel, for a brief time, that he belonged, that he was a part of something larger than himself. This was a Christmas of a very different kind, a Christmas that was not about the solitary assertion of independence, but about the messy, complicated, and beautiful reality of two cultures coming together. It was a Christmas that was a testament to the power of love, of family, of the simple, profound human need to connect, to share, to be a part of something larger than oneself. It was a reminder that the wilderness was not just a place of solitude and of danger. It was also a place of connection, of exchange, of the unexpected and beautiful ways that different cultures can come together and create something new. Section 4. The Long Dark Night of the Soul. But for every mountain man who spent his Christmas at a rowdy rendezvous or in the warm embrace of a Native American family, there were countless others who spent it alone in the deep, silent heart of the wilderness. And for these men, Christmas was not a time of celebration, but a time of reflection, of introspection, of a long, dark night of the soul. Imagine a man alone in a small, smoky cabin, the wind howling outside, the snow piling up against the walls. He has a full belly, a warm fire, a comfortable bed of furs. He is safe. He is secure. He is alive. But he is also utterly, completely alone. And on Christmas, a day that is so deeply associated with family, with community, with love, that loneliness can become a heavy, suffocating blanket. He would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, watching the embers glow and fade. He would listen to the wind, to the creak of the cabin walls, to the silence that pressed in on him from all sides. He would think of the family he had left behind, a mother, a father, perhaps siblings, perhaps a sweetheart who had waited for him to return and who had eventually given up and married another. He would think of the Christmases of his childhood, of the warmth and the laughter and the love that he had given up for a life of freedom and of solitude. He would think of the friends he had lost, men who had died in the mountains, killed by grizzly bears, by hostile tribes, by the brutal cold, by simple accidents that in civilization would have been minor, but in the wilderness were fatal. He would think of the dangers he had faced, of the times he had come close to death, of the long, hard road that had led him to this place. He would think of the man he had been, young, idealistic, full of dreams of adventure and of freedom, and the man he had become, hard, weathered, scarred, a man who had seen too much and felt too little. And he would ask himself the question that every mountain man asked himself at some point. Was it worth it? Was the freedom worth the loneliness? Was the adventure worth the danger? Was the life he had chosen worth the life he had given up? Can we today even begin to understand such a sacrifice? What would we give up for a taste of that absolute, untethered freedom? This was a Christmas of a very different kind, a Christmas that was not about joy, but about a deep and profound sadness. It was a Christmas that was a reminder of all that he had lost, of all that he had sacrificed. It was a Christmas that was a test of his strength, not his physical strength, but his mental and emotional strength. It was a Christmas that would either break him or make him stronger. And for some men, it was a Christmas that they did not survive, not physically, but spiritually. a Christmas that marked the beginning of the end, the slow descent into madness or into despair. Section 5. The Rituals of Survival. But Christmas for the mountain man was not just about feasting or reflecting. It was also about survival. And for a man alone in the wilderness, survival required constant vigilance, constant work, constant attention to the small details that could mean the difference between life and death. On Christmas morning, a mountain man would wake before dawn, just as he did every other morning. He would check his traps, trudging through the deep snow in his snowshoes, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He would check each trap carefully, looking for beaver, for marten, for any animal whose pelt would bring a good price at the trading post. This was his livelihood, his reason for being in the mountains, and it did not stop for Christmas. He would gather firewood, chopping down dead trees, splitting the logs, stacking them near his cabin. Firewood was life in the winter, and a mountain man could never have too much of it. He would check his food stores, taking inventory of his dried meat, his pemmican, his small cache of flour and beans. He would calculate how long his supplies would last, how much longer he could stay in the mountains before he would need to make the dangerous journey to the nearest trading post. He would maintain his equipment, cleaning his rifle, sharpening his knife, mending his clothes. A mountain man's equipment was his lifeline, and he treated it with the care and the respect that it deserved. A broken rifle, a dull knife, a torn coat, any of these could be a death sentence in the wilderness. This was the reality of Christmas for the mountain man. It was not a day of rest, not a day of leisure. It was a day of work, of survival, of the constant grinding effort that was required to stay alive in one of the harshest environments on earth. Section 6. The Meaning of Freedom. So why did they do it? Why did these men choose a life of such hardship, such loneliness, such danger? The answer, I think, lies in a single word: freedom. The mountain man was free in a way that few of us can truly understand. He was free from the constraints of society, from the expectations of family, from the rules and the regulations that govern civilized life. He was free to go where he wanted, to do what he wanted, to live as he wanted. He answered to no one but himself. This freedom came at a terrible price. It meant loneliness, it meant danger, it meant a life that was brutal and short. But for the mountain man, it was a price worth paying. Because in that freedom, he found something that he could not find anywhere else. He found himself. On Christmas, sitting alone in his cabin, staring into the fire, the mountain man would feel that freedom in his bones. He would feel the weight of it, the responsibility of it, the terrible and beautiful burden of being completely and utterly free. And he would know in that moment that he had made the right choice, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Conclusion: a different kind of Christmas. The Christmas of the mountain man was not our Christmas. It was a Christmas that was stripped of all the sentimentality, all the commercialism, all the noise and the chaos of our modern celebrations. It was a Christmas that was raw and real and deeply, profoundly human. It was a Christmas of solitude, of survival, of the simple, profound pleasure of a full belly and a warm fire. It was a Christmas of community, of chaos, of the wild, untamed spirit of the rendezvous. It was a Christmas of connection, of exchange, of the beautiful and unexpected ways that different cultures can come together. And it was a Christmas of reflection, of introspection, of the long, dark night of the soul. These are the forgotten Christmases of the American frontier, the Christmases of the men who lived and died in the vast, untamed wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. They are Christmases that were born of hardship, of necessity, of a fierce and unyielding independence. They are Christmases that speak of a time when Christmas was not about what you had, but about who you were, and what you were capable of. And they are Christmases that, in our world of abundance and of ease, have something profound and important to teach us. They teach us that Christmas is not about the gifts, the decorations, the elaborate meals. It is about something deeper, something more fundamental. It is about survival, about resilience, about the human capacity to find meaning and purpose even in the most difficult of circumstances. The Mountain Man's Christmas teaches us about the value of solitude, about the importance of being comfortable with ourselves, with our own thoughts, with our own company, in a world that is constantly connected, constantly distracted, constantly noisy. The Mountain Man's Christmas is a reminder that there is value in silence, in stillness, in being alone with our thoughts. It teaches us about the importance of community, even for the most independent among us. The wild celebration of the Winter Rendezvous, the warm embrace of a Native American family. These remind us that we are social creatures, that we need each other, that even the most solitary among us crave connection and belonging. It teaches us about the power of freedom, about the terrible and beautiful burden of being completely responsible for our own lives. The Mountain Man chose his path, and he lived with the consequences of that choice. He did not blame others for his hardships. He did not expect others to save him. He was free, and that freedom defined him. And perhaps most importantly, the Mountain Man's Christmas teaches us about the true meaning of sacrifice. These men gave up everything, family, comfort, safety, community, for a life of freedom and adventure. They paid a terrible price for that freedom, but they paid it willingly, because they believed that the life they had chosen was worth the life they had given up. As we celebrate our own Christmases, surrounded by family and friends, by warmth and comfort and abundance, we would do well to remember the Mountain Men. We would do well to remember their Christmases of solitude and of survival, their Christmases of freedom and of sacrifice. We would do well to remember that Christmas, at its core, is not about what we have, but about who we are and what we are willing to give up for the things we truly believe in.